Stand! Stand! Stand!
You want to dance? Ask me nicely. Let's talk. Better listen very carefully.
No problem.
You having fun?
No!
Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to Jean-Claude Van Damme, Episode 6, the podcast where we talk about Van Damme movies because, well, the only thing better than Van Damme is two Van Dammes. I'm your host, Marcus Jones, and joining me today is my friend Evan Purchell. Evan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. How you doing?
Very well. Thank you for joining me today. So let's kind of start. You're kind of a B-movie enthusiast, connoisseur, if you will. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with Van Damme, or maybe lack thereof, kind of what you've seen, your general thoughts on him, and why you chose today's film.
Yeah,
Hey, I'm coming at you with the hard-hitting questions, man.
yeah, well, I guess for people around my age, I'm 26. A lot of people's first experiences with JCVD was Street Fighter, and that was mine. I don't think I saw it when it first came out, but I distinctly remember watching it on VHS in elementary school and just being kind of blown away by it. It's an amazing movie. It really is. I guess.
That's cool. Well, I know you said that you actually haven't seen too many of his films, although you have a very impressive VHS collection of his.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of his movies. I know him. It's just I don't watch a lot of action movies, I guess, or at least from his time period from the 90s. My wheelhouse is more of the 80s and the 70s and just the weird stuff, essentially, for lack of a better term. And I just never got around to seeing a lot of his stuff. And it wasn't until earlier this year when I saw Bloodsport at a local independent theater that kind of set me off on wanting to see more of his stuff. And that movie just completely blew me away. It was amazing.
Good. I'm glad you finally got to see that.
Yeah, and it's so weird seeing that movie because you could see how influential it was on like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and all these video games that have come since, and just all the straight-to-video movies from the 90s. Even Bloodsport 2 and 3, and I think there's a fourth one?
There probably is. I only know of the 3, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And the way it kind of sort of led the way for that type of like martial arts star in the 90s with like the American Ninja movies from the 80s.
Dudikoff.
Yeah, Dudikoff, and I can't remember his name, but the guy who was in Future War, Daniel...
Daniel with Broad Street or something like that?
It's Daniel B. something. I can't remember his
name. Bernhardt.
Bernhardt, yeah.
Bernhardt, yeah.
I think he was actually in Bloodsport, too. I think he played Frank Dukes in that movie.
Yeah, I think he was in the two, at least the first two Bloodsport sequels, I believe.
Which I don't...
He's actually kind of just not Van Damme. He's played, I think, the Van Damme role in several like sequels and not Van Damme sort of films.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that Van Damme kind of shone bright for a little while before like slumming it in the direct-to-video market. But he kind of led the way for all these other people in the 90s and the early 2000s. And, I mean, even now, because didn't the new Kickboxer movie just get released?
Yes, it did, and I'm actually going to see that later this evening.
with a not Van Damme in it, right? But he's in it too, right?
Yeah, Van Damme's in it. He played the main character in the original, and now he's playing more of like the sensei role, like the trainer role, which is pretty cool.
So kind of like a reboot, but not a reboot.
Yeah, well, it's a reboot exactly because they're using even same character names and stuff like that for the main character. But yeah, kind of like more of a soft reboot, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I picked this movie just because it looks so ridiculous. And I know that playing twins is kind of like one of his big tropes. So I wanted to see where that began. And God...
Well, that's funny because, yes, this is the first of 2 films he did where he plays his own twin.
Is it just...
The other one being... it's only 2, but the other one being... well, I guess actually, no, it's 3. Because
he plays twins in Replicant, too, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, not so much twins, because one's a clone of
Gotcha.
the other, but yes, very much so in that one. But also, 1996, he did a movie called Maximum Risk, where he plays his own twin. But yeah, so yeah, 3 movies. I forgot about that.
And
And it was funny that you mentioned the whole his influence on Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and stuff, because he was actually the influence for Johnny Cage.
Yeah.
They wanted to use his likeness originally, but he was like, "Nah, I'm not going to do that."
Which is fascinating to me, because he plays Guile in Street Fighter the movie, and then he plays Guile in Street Fighter the movie, the game, which is motion capture to look just like Mortal Kombat the game.
Yeah, so he kind of looks like a Bobo Johnny Cage.
He literally looks like a Bobo Johnny Cage in Street Fighter the movie, the game, which I just love. It's so stupid. And the game,
yeah. So like you mentioned, you did choose Double Impact from 1991. This is another movie he did with Sheldon Lettich, who was the co-writer on Bloodsport, and he also did Lionheart with, and then a little bit later Legionnaire with. But yeah, this is kind of the first time Van Damme kind of branched out into a different sort of movie instead of just, fighting in tournaments kind of movie.
Yeah, and that's the thing I thought was kind of interesting, is that it seems kind of like the dividing point between the first half of his career, where he's doing all these martial arts movies, and the 90s, where he really kind of tries to take the Schwarzenegger route and doing these sci-fi movies, like the dumb action movies, and beyond, really.
Yeah, which worked to varying degrees of success for him, at least briefly. He definitely seemed to do much better in the straight martial arts style films, but he had some hits along the way. But yeah, this is before the direct-to-video years, which aren't completely useless, I will say.
Yeah, of course.
And I also just love his resurgence recently, and like his comeback story with now having an Amazon pilot and having a new Kickboxer movie out in theaters, which has already been greenlit for a sequel.
Yeah, and I mean, he just... I wonder, like, what part of, like, social media plays in that, because I love his Facebook feed. It's amazing. And his Instagram. He's kind of like Vin Diesel, and one of those guys who makes these really mindless movies, but seems like a cool person. And that kind of makes
Absolutely, you want to like him.
Yeah, you want to root for him. You want him to succeed, even though he's been kind of slumming it for a while.
Yeah, well, I also think it's not taking himself seriously, because he definitely was very particular about his image, and especially the 90s and stuff, and I think after the 2000s, where he was kind of at the bottom of the barrel, to where he kind of was like, okay, I don't have to take myself so seriously, I can play with my image some, and he started doing weird things like the Coors Light commercials, or like Welcome to the Jungle, like more comedy roles that poke fun at his action movie image, and I think that helped a lot too. That made him more relatable, make him seem like a cooler guy.
And, I mean, if you want to, like, start going into the movie, I think that's one of the interesting things, is that it's kind of him sort of taking a shot at his 80s image with, the Dayglow outfits and his first scene in the movie, he's wearing, like, leggings and, like, and he's wearing these, like, neon-colored leggings and doing, like, head kicks in this, like, aerobic studio.
It's obscene. Like, because one of the tropes in his movies is nudity. He usually shows off his buns and like shirtless fighting and stuff. But I had to count the spandex scene just because the first thing you see is a close-up of a woman just being like, oh, it still hurts. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And you just kind of go down and just see all of this woman in spandex. And then you see all of him in spandex. And it is just almost obscene.
And the weird thing with that, in that whole first little sequence in like the aerobic studio, I picked up throughout the entire movie this weird undercurrent of like kind of nasty homophobia in the whole thing. And
oh yes.
And I mean, I wonder if the whole movie is kind of like this not quite subconscious rejection of that and his sort of gay image that he had going on.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is that there's always like homosexual subtext, or sometimes it's right out there in his movies and stuff. But this, I actually did an episode on Hard Target a little while ago, and there's like 3 or 4 times in that movie where he's just like, oh, go tell your boyfriend, and it's just weird things that he doesn't need to say. And yeah, there's 2 or 3 times where he's straight up, like, it's bad.
I mean, I'll just go ahead and say he straight up calls his brother a faggot 3 times in the movie.
Yes, 3 times. And I was like, what is this? Like a 90s teen comedy? What the fuck is going on here?
And I guess, like, if you really want to analyze a dumb movie like Double Impact, well, I think you can analyze it because he co-wrote it and he produced it and he was obviously very hands-on with this project. And I wonder if the character of Chad, the Hollywood one, is some sort of, like, weird, queer, like... It's like
maybe a commentary on the way people see him as his Hollywood image?
Yeah, I mean, It's just
Well, I mean, it's possible. He definitely even said, I think, in interviews, he's much closer to Chad than he is Alex in this, which is more of like the bad boy, kill everybody kind of person. But it worked. And I think this is around the time where Van Damme really became kind of comfortable with his image and in film. So he was able to play both of these roles pretty well. But yeah, that was really off-putting. Like, I had to remember once that first started happening, like the first time his brother called him a faggot, I was like, oh yeah, this is 1991.
Yeah.
I guess this is just going to happen.
And I mean, there's only 2 other women characters in the movie. One of them is a predatory lesbian. And the other one, she's only there so that Alex, the tough Van Damme, can have this, like, Argento or Bava-esque, like, Fantasia, like, sex scene in his mind of his brother having sex with his girlfriend, who he's constantly calling a faggot, of course. Like, it's such a weird movie.
Yeah, but I guess also that's a little bit of commentary too, just about like the fragile male ego and just how quickly it is like he's so insecure with himself. He's like, oh, of course my girlfriend's gonna fuck my twin brother, and then like just being emasculated by that. So having to say that to him to maybe feel better about himself. But also I think there's a little bit of vanity in there. It's like, well, of course she's gonna fuck him. He looks just like me.
And fun fact, I watched an interview with Van Damme on the Arsenio Hall show where he was promoting this movie. And apparently the French cut of the movie has a harder version of that scene.
Well, I would hope so, because watching it, I was just like, come on, perfect opportunity, because he doesn't show his ass in this movie, and that's the perfect scene to do it in. We see, like, the tip top of his butt crack, but that's it. And I was like, come on, perfect time to show your buns in this movie. Female nudity? They're showing boobs? Who wants to see that? Show those buns!
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, he's a good-looking man. He's really good.
He is.
And it's so weird because in the promotion he's constantly saying, "Oh, there's romance, there's love," and it's such a sexless movie.
Maybe between brothers at best.
Yeah, I mean he was even selling it by saying like if you like if you like a nice love scene, you're gonna enjoy the woman's butt. He said that on Arsenio Hall. It's like
if you like a good fuck scene, we got some titties in this movie for you.
But it's such a sexless movie. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's so weird. And again, the female character in this movie, like any female love interest he seems to have in almost all of his movies, really, again, just there to give him a case of the not gays.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, he's totally into women. Like, she's superfluous to the plot for the most part. But hey, she's here, and hey, maybe they'll have a sex scene.
And that kind of like strikes at what I think is the biggest problem with this movie is that it's almost 2 hours long for no reason. There's no plot development. There's no character development. We're told at the beginning that these 2 brothers are split up near birth, and that's it. We don't hear about how they grew up. How one of them they both conveniently wound up living in France, so they have accents.
Well, not even that. Okay, so I will say, just to start off, like, the first half hour or so of this movie and the last half hour or so are excellent.
Yeah.
It's just, there's a lot of stuff in the middle that is just kind of redundant and drags on and stuff. But the weirdest thing, because a big trope in his movies is trying to explain, or just not explaining at all, his nationality.
Yeah.
So when we see the opening, and it is in Hong Kong, and it's about them building this tunnel or whatever, their parents are British, I think, and they're babies at the time, and they're 2 of the whitest babies you've ever seen. But when they get split up, one gets taken by Jeffrey Lewis to France, and that's where he's raised before they move out to California. So that kind of is trying to explain why he has a French accent, even though he's raised by an American. So I don't know. And then the other one is dropped off at an orphanage in Hong Kong, but it happens to be an orphanage run by French people, which they show because there's a bunch of little children singing Frere Jacques as she drops the baby off. So even though he grows up on the streets of Hong Kong and stuff, he was raised in a French orphanage, which gave him an accent. And the biggest, weirdest part of this is that, okay, so Chad goes with Jeffrey Lewis, has a good kind of richer lifestyle. Alex kind of is an orphan, grows up on the streets of Hong Kong, but he's dropped off there when he's a baby by his caretaker nanny person who just leaves him there.
Yeah.
So how does he know that his name is Alex growing up? Because she didn't say anything to the orphanage.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could actually build an interesting story with this setup. It's just that once the movie gets going, there's no plot other than we need to kill these people because they killed our parents. there aren't any like bonding scenes between the two of them. They don't talk about like their childhoods or how it was like, you know, growing up apart or any of that. There's none of that.
There's maybe 5 lines total that are just kind of throwaway lines when the plot needs them. But yeah, no, it would be interesting to kind of see at least a little bit of how they were raised and grown up, but we just kind of get the basics, like, oh, he was in an orphanage and then he grew up in Hong Kong, and oh, he was taken by Jeffrey Lewis and then kind of lived a pampered lifestyle while still training for martial arts. But after the orphanage scene, we just cut, and it's just 25 years later, which they signal because a hip-hop song plays.
Yeah, that sounds like an
as we're in LA.
It sounds like an Art of Noise song. It's terrible.
Yes. Which actually, there are only 4 or so songs in this movie, all done by the same group called Jen.
Yeah. And I was looking that up last night. I don't think they ever did anything else.
Well, I have to assume that those songs were written for this movie, especially the last one that plays during the credits called Feel the Impact.
Yeah.
Which, when those credits started and that song started playing, I had this odd feeling inside of me because it's almost as if 25 years ago, which, by the way, 25th anniversary of this movie, it was released early August in 1991. I feel like maybe they knew I would be doing this podcast 25 years later and knew that I would need a song to close the podcast on, so they wrote Feel the Impact, because it is goddamn perfect.
It is such an early 90s, like, bad techno song. It's so bad. I love it, though.
Oh, yeah. R&B, hip-hop with some techno. Yeah, I love it. That is going to be playing over the end of this podcast. I already downloaded it and have it on my computer. So, also, just before we get into the actual movie, which, of course, we did kind of mention another trope, which is him having a personal vendetta against the bad guys because they're avenging their parents' murder, which they find out about eventually. But I do want to mention that, yes, Van Damme co-wrote this and came up with the story with Sheldon Lettich, but there were 2 more writers that were on this.
Yeah.
They were Peter Crykes and Steve Morrison, and they're a duo, and their only credits are this, for writing, is this, Anna and the King, Back to the Beach, and Star Trek IV, and the only other real credit they have is that they are both co-executive producers on Kevin Smith's new movie, Yoga Hosers.
Oh, God.
So, they have an amazing resume.
I mean, you had me at Back to the Beach, so...
I wish I heard that more than just now in my life. Like, why has no one ever said that to me before?
And I saw on IMDb on the trivia page that apparently Van Damme originally pitched this Albert Pune as a movie to do, and he actually shot him down.
This was after he did Cyborg with it.
Yeah, Van Damme said he wanted to do an adaptation of Alexander Dumas's The Corsican Brothers. Which was also...
Hey, it's you know, right up there with Cheech and Chong's The Corsican Brothers.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's been done before, and it kind of matches up with the final product, and Pune was like, no, we shouldn't do the gimmicks, and that was the last time they ever spoke to each other.
From the guy that shoves cyborgs into any movie he can, we shouldn't do the gimmick pictures. But no, and also just a year later, in 1992, Jackie Chan had Twin Dragons come out, which is the same exact movie.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I feel like this is a movie that should be kind of analyzed, is that he actually co-wrote it. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where I can kind of see where he puts himself in the movie and how like all the weird little personal things come out in it. Even though I'm not sure he wants them to, necessarily.
Maybe they just kind of come out naturally. But I will say, people don't really give Van Damme enough credit in this regard. He never went as far as, like, directing a bunch of his own stuff or anything, but he's kind of a bit like Stallone in a way, to where in so many of his movies, he has a story credit. He writes it with the director and stuff. He makes his own vehicles.
Yeah. And it's like, this is what you come up with?
Hey, but this is like the 4th or 5th movie that he had a hand in, so he's like, I think he just kind of wanted to do something different, do more of an action comedy, because he kind of just did straight martial arts movies, and then with like Lionheart, he did something a bit more sappy and sentimental, and now I think he's like, oh, I kind of want to show my range, so I want to have some action comedy, and I want to play like a pampered Hollywood kind of guy, and more of my screen image as this tough badass.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into really the rest of the 90s, I feel like, for him, and just kind of like the hardened tough guy image. Did he really have that like fun image for any of his other 90s movies after this, or?
I mean,
because that was kind of the way I had it in my head. Was that this?
Well, he did some action comedies and stuff like kind of Double Team and Knockoff,
where
Double Team. More silly.
Yeah,
but mostly, yeah, it was more hard action.
Yeah, I kind of blocked those two out of my head. I watched about 20 minutes of Double Team a while back, and I was like, I'm good.
Oh man, he fights a tiger at the end of it. So. But yeah, and Knockoff actually, I want to watch it again. I watched it a couple years ago, but I actually kind of enjoyed Knockoff. That's the one he did with Rob Schneider. So,
and
who by the way, Rob Schneider, most unlikely action sidekick in the 90s.
Yeah, I for the longest time I never knew that he was in so many like weird action movies in the 90s. He's in that and Demolition Man and Judge Dredd and
yeah, he did a couple with Stallone, which is kind of weird. Yeah, I guess let's just well, I do also want to mention that Bolo Young is in this as well as like the kind of second main baddie, and he is excellent. It is so nice. He played Chong Li, of course, in Bloodsport. It's great, and that kind of leads to one of my biggest problems in like the final act is that Bolo Young is so awesome as a bad guy and he's so intimidating and badass that once we get past his final confrontation scene with Van Damme towards the end, then it's just kind of boring because you already defeated the two like actual intimidating fighters that are bad guys, and then it's just kind of chasing wimpy businessmen for the rest of it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem is that, going back to what I've been saying, is that there's no plot development. I mean, there are a couple scenes where the two Van Dammes run into, like, the two bad guys, but in every single one of those scenes, the only thing they say is, fuck you or go fuck yourself. They don't say anything else. There's no interaction. And then when the Frank character, you know, is in contact with the two bad guys, all he says is, fuck you or go fuck yourself. Like, there are no stakes. It's so weird that they have this, like, almost 2-hour-long movie and there's nothing. You know what I mean?
Well, it really makes no sense because basically what happens is 25 years later, Jeffrey Lewis, who had been raising Van Damme Chad, got pictures of Van Damme Alex in Hong Kong sent to him, and he's like, yep, that's him. So now that we found his twin brother, we're going to go to Hong Kong and we're going to try to reclaim your parents' fortune? But what the fuck happened 25 years ago? Like, you just ran away? You didn't say anything about how he was murdered, about how you saw Griffith, about how you know who did it? Like, the kids are the rightful heirs anyway? It had to take 25 years to do that? Like, everyone seems to have forgotten about it by then? So that's kind of their thing. They're going to avenge their parents' murder and reclaim their fortune. But the bad guys... they're running drugs and they're making money, and for some reason they capture people and they let them live, and
they eat cake. They eat cakes that are made to look like freighter ships.
That was kind of cool.
That was kind of cool.
But yeah, like I don't get it. For some reason they capture people and keep hostages and let people live for no reason when it would make more sense to them to just kill those people that are witnesses to their crimes.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. There's literally, it's an hour 50-minute long movie and there's almost nothing there. Just set piece after set piece after set piece, which not necessarily a bad thing, but after a while. Well,
yeah, it kind of drags on, especially in the middle. But, I mean, there are some good action scenes, some good action set pieces, a couple of good fights. I will say that minus maybe 3 or 4 instances, the actual double effects of either using body doubles or split screen and stuff are pretty fucking flawless. It's only the couple of times where they do, like, horrible green screen shots to get them close enough together, like when they have to kind of sit next to each other or be that close in a different point of view. Like, those look terrible, but other than that, all the double effects are pretty good.
Yeah, no, it's weird. I thought the doubling effects were actually really good. Some of the other effects were really bad, though. Like, every scene where characters are driving in cars, the green screen for the rear projection was really bad. That, and then the scene at the end where he's hanging off the ledge.
Oh, yeah, that was, again, anytime they used green screen, it was not good.
Yeah, no, it's really bad.
Oh, yeah, and of course, I mean, the usual thing with stunt doubles is anytime there's, like, stunt driving or anything, even from, like, kind of having the shot far away, like, in the beginning, Jeffrey Lewis is apparently turning his car around and racing back to try to save their parents, and you just see the stunt driver, and he has, like, dark black hair as opposed to Jeffrey Lewis's light blonde hair.
Yeah.
And I will just call out one more person that's in this movie, which is Camel Criffa, who played Tong Po in the 4th Kickboxer movie and was in several of Van Damme's actual films. But he played like the mahjong manager at Alex's place.
Okay.
And I was thinking maybe him and Michael Cassie were in this movie, but he's actually not. It seems like in all of Van Damme's movies from the late 80s to early 90s, one of those two guys were in the movies. Like, every time Michael C. wasn't in one of his movies, Camel Criffa was there.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
It's interesting how he kind of has his, like, weird little repertory players that he always kind of tosses into the movies. Them and Bolo Young is in a lot of his movies, I think.
Well, yeah, and he brought Sheldon Lettich, like, all the way, because I think Sheldon Lettich maybe wrote 1 or 2 movies before he met Van Damme, and then co-wrote Bloodsport, and they did, like, 4 movies together. And that's pretty much all of Lettich's IMDb is just Van Damme movies that he did with him. But he did that with a bunch of different directors. He'd work with them multiple times and stuff like that, especially a lot of the Hong Kong directors that he brought over.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about that I thought was really kind of weird is the whole point of this movie is to show off Van Damme's acting range, right?
As much as he has.
Which is, I thought it was weird because there are these 2 different characters he's playing, but they are essentially the same character, you know? The marketing tagline is 1 packs a punch, 1 packs a piece. But they're both martial arts masters, and they both know how to shoot guns right.
Oh, well, yeah, and that's the thing. You didn't finish that tagline because 1 packs a punch, the other packs a piece. Together, they deliver. And the weird thing is, yeah, you're kind of right, because, of course, it shows that, like, Chad, he, trains in martial arts, he trains dancing and stuff like that, so that makes sense. You figure the other one, Alex, he just kind of grew up on the street, so maybe he's a street fighter at at best. But no, he knows just as much martial arts, it seems. And then, yeah, you figure Alex knows guns, but no, Chad just is able to use guns as well. And I do like that he didn't just go completely, like, black and white with the characters to where, Alex is just a rough and tough, like, badass, and Chad is just, like, a happy-go-lucky whatever.
Yeah.
Like, there's a bit of subtlety to both of them. Like, because Alex does still have a sense of humor, and Chad does still have a serious side, but I think that's more that he just doesn't have that much of a range between the two at this point.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of the things about this movie that was just frustrating, because I think it could have been better had it been a little more black and white like that, honestly. Like, you could set up all the...
It might help, because there are a couple of scenes where it's kind of hard to tell them apart. Like, during the whole club scene where they both have their hair slicked back.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the fact that one had a toothpick in its mouth and one had, like, bruises, you wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah, for some reason, the Alex character has, like, this giant welt on his forehead the entire movie that's never explained.
Well, that's just Van Damme. He just always has that welt.
Does he?
And I think it's whenever, yeah, if you look at pretty much any of his other movies where his hair doesn't cover up that part, he just has like a kind of lump on his forehead. And I think it pops a lot more when he's emoting or acting. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, it shows up quite often. Usually the camera has to hit it just right and you'll see that pop up.
Because I feel like I feel like there's a lot to talk about with this movie. I just don't know where to go next.
Well, I mean, there is, but I guess we kind of already talked about all of the plot, more or less, minus a couple of plot points in the middle.
Yeah.
I will say this might be one of the most quotable Van Damme movies, just for ridiculous out there quotes.
The silk underwear thing?
Oh, the silk underwear thing. But also just when we're first introduced to Chad and he's in all the spandex, he's teaching a class of women who are just all eye-fucking the shit out of him.
Yeah.
And one of his first lines is just like, because of my big legs and karate, I can do the splits, no problem. And that's his first and I think only time actually doing the splits in this movie.
That's the only time, yeah. Which was kind of a disappointment, to be honest.
Yeah, he does a lot of, like, flying spin kicks and stuff like that, but, yeah, it was used more for a throwaway joke, I guess.
I think that was one of the things where it kind of went to my weird little theory about how the Chad character kind of represents his 80s persona. You know, the goofy guy who does the splits and is, this karate master and knows all these martial arts, whereas the Alex character...
More the charming, funny guy.
Yeah.
And maybe Alex is more what he was aiming to get towards?
Yeah, like the Stallone or the Seagal or, I mean, even like the Bronson, maybe. The action hero. The guy who would wind up in, like, Universal Soldier or Street Fighter or all those other movies.
I think it's maybe less like being like, hey, this is what you think of me and this is what I want to be. I think maybe it's more him being like, hey, I can do both these things, guys. Give me your scripts. Give me your casting calls.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's weird because as part of that is that Alex character is, like, hyper masculine, and I kind of think that fits in with the whole 90s action, because I mean 80s action movies are obviously hyper masculine, but there's also kind of an unintentional queer edge to a lot of those movies, like, the men being with all the men and all that, And
I think that's the thing. They try to be so hyper masculine that they don't realize, like, oh, you're really just doing like lovingly lingering shots on bulging wet muscles and stuff like that for 30 minutes in your movie. Like, no, like you're trying to be masculine and everything, but you end up kind of tipping it to the other way to where it's more just kind of like muscle porn.
yeah, and as part of that, it's almost like they're trying to show disdain for that with the whole like the silk underwear thing. And I mean, come on, we all know
Who doesn't want silk underwear? For
the
real?
people who wore silk underwear were the Van Dammes and the Stallones and the Schwarzeneggers and all them.
Well, I have never worn silk underwear because I'm a poor man, but it sounds delightful.
And it's just so weird to me that it's brought up again and again and again and again. It is like the one running thing through the entire movie, and it's like, how did they even come up with this in the first place?
Well, see, and I think they did go way overboard with like the way Chad dresses and stuff like that, because when he first gets to Hong Kong, he's wearing like tiny like bright pink shorts, and then he has like a aquamarine polo shirt on,
Yeah.
and then he has like a orangish tan jacket. In addition to that, it's just like clashing all of these colors, and it's the most 90s outfits you could look at. But then you get to Alex and he's just like leather jacket, hair slicked back, always chomping on a cigar.
Yeah. It's in that weird kind of blending period between the 80s and the 90s where fashion was probably at its worst. I'm thinking of like a Cool as Ice sort of thing.
Oh, so you mean at its best?
At its best. You know what I mean. Best and worst.
Yeah, I gotcha. But yes, no, I've seen Cool as Ice
That weird...
more times than I can probably count.
Sadly, Van Damme doesn't melt ice in someone's mouth in this movie.
Yeah, so once the twins finally do meet, which takes not very long at all, because they go to Alex's club, and everyone treats him like he's Alex, treats Chad like he's Alex. So we get, like, a guy come up to him, and you think he's gonna fight him, but he just, like, hands him a stack of money, and he's like, oh, what'd he give you? And he's like, cash money! I love Hong Kong! And then immediately he meets Alex's girlfriend, who takes him to the back and puts her hand down his pants, and, you know, just to show you how masculine and what a big swinging dick he is, she's like, oh, what do you got down here? He's like, big surprise. Huge surprise.
With the black silk underwear.
Yeah, with the black silk underwear, and then the Van Dammes finally meet, and immediately Alex headbutts Chad for making moves on his lady and dressing in black silk underwear.
Yeah, I think that's the first time he uses that word.
He does, and I swear, after watching this movie, I was like, do I need to make this one of the tropes of Van Damme movies? Because after this and Hard Target, I was like, I hope I don't keep finding this when I revisit other movies. I hope I don't have to make that a trope.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I guess at the time it didn't really... I mean, it was pretty acceptable. But going back and watching these movies, it stings. It completely sticks out.
Absolutely. It is completely uncomfortable, and I guess that was kind of the norm and kind of okay all the way till the late 90s, because like I said, any of like your teen comedies from the late 90s and stuff, that's all in there. Like, Can't Hardly Wait, that's a movie I really enjoy, but there's like 3 instances where it is just like the funniest thing in the world to call someone that.
Well, yeah.
And
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, there's like 2 or 3 times where they call people fags.
And again, I've been watching that since I was a tiny child and just, like, never picked up on that. So I don't know if just growing up that way, like, that was just the norm. Because I kind of remember, like, I think being, like, 10 to 12 years old, like, yeah, that's what, like, dudes fucking said to each other and shit all the time. And it was terrible.
And that's...
Because I guess, like, that's the biggest insult you could hurl at someone. And even in this movie, whenever Alex does say that to Chad, he seems like he gets his feelings so fucking hurt. Because after it happens, like, the 3rd time, that's when he storms away, and he's like, no, I'm leaving, I'm gonna swim away, like he's a little kid running away from home because someone hurt his feelings.
It's totally like the new 90s Van Damme rejecting the old 80s Van Damme. No butt shots in this movie.
Yeah, they tease it, it's almost there, but they're like, no more showing buns, you're not gonna leer at my butt anymore, audience, we're gonna show you some woman titties.
This movie's for...
But we also get to see some Bolo Young titties, and those things are pretty rockin'.
Yeah.
I swear, he can do so many things with it. He could open cans with, like, crush cans with those things.
Yeah, no, every time Bolo Young showed up in the movie, I immediately got sucked back into it. He's amazing. I love Bolo Yeon.
Oh yeah, and especially because in his first shot, when the parents are getting killed in the beginning, he gets shot like 3 fucking times, like twice in the face, and he is just good. He keeps coming back, and then when he shows up later, 25 years later, he looks even more badass because he has like a dead eye and like scars on his face and stuff, even more intimidating.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things I just remembered I meant to bring up was just how excessive that opening scene is with the gore. It is super bloody. The whole
Dude, 3 minutes in and we have like violent gun deaths.
And a lot of the movies I've been watching lately have been, from the 70s and the 80s, and action movies from around then weren't too bloody, really. But seeing something like this, it's like, oh my god, it's really gory. I was surprised.
Well, I mean, even if you look at something like the Death Wish movies or something, most of that is like you see people getting shot and then like they fly back or something.
Yeah, it's implied.
And you might see a little blood here and there. But here it's like, no, someone gets shot with a gun, you see pieces of their flesh fly off and blood spurt everywhere.
Yeah, no, it looks like that scene in like Maniac where Tom Savini gets his head blown up. It's like that
Yes.
level of gore. That was something I meant to bring up, and it really surprised me because I was not expecting that, especially 2 minutes into a movie and being done to like these nice parents.
Yeah, and I guess that is. I guess that's just kind of the 80s, like, macho mega action transitioning into the 90s, where I guess maybe they were able to get away with a little bit more, like the violence can escalate like that. So even though you might have killed like 100 people in an action movie in the 80s, like most of it was, off screen or just random people getting shot and falling down, as opposed to like, no, we're gonna stick your face right in the gore.
And I kind of wonder if that's maybe part of the reason why the movie is so sexless, is that they were able to get away with more violence, and in return there's no sex or no romance the entire movie essentially, except for like one scene.
Yeah, and because the only scene that has any kind of sex, really, I mean, there's the slightest bit of like sexual tension between the Danielle and Chad when they're like stuck together when she first gets naked. But yeah, the big scene is Alex having this weird drunken fantasy in his head of his brother fucking his girlfriend, and I guess that's something too. I mean, what other action hero has had like intense sexual fantasies about himself in a movie? Like Van Damme, that's it.
Yeah, and just the way that one scene is shot, where it's gauzy, like bright red and green and blue, like out of like an Italian movie. They're on like the deck of this ship just going at it and banging.
It looks like a scene from like a 90s Cinemax show.
Yeah, it looks like an Andy Sedaris scene, but like with more money.
And I don't even really remember what the music was during that time, because it was kind of quick cuts, but like if they had like an R&B song playing during that would have been excellent.
And I mean, isn't that kind of one of the big Van Damme tropes too, is him drinking in movies?
Yes, drinking and or dancing, I kind of lump those two together. He doesn't really dance in this, and when we started getting towards the end of the movie, I was like, oh shit, I guess he doesn't drink either. Like, that's when I got to knock off the list. But no, Alex gets extremely drunk off a bottle of Johnny Walker Red.
Yeah, he drinks almost the entire bottle.
Oh yeah, and apparently there was a second bottle, because when he wakes up on the beach the next morning, there's another empty bottle that's floating in the ocean, because he broke the first bottle.
And then that lovely line that I had to write down, maybe I'm drunk, tomorrow I'll be sober, but he'll always be a faggot.
Yes, which is a line that makes Chad run out of the house, like, crying, just like, no, I'm leaving, fuck him, I don't want him anymore.
And of course, right before that, there's another mention of the silk underwear.
Oh yeah, because that's mentioned like 8 times, because he calls him Mr. Black Silk Underwear. When Alex is first trying to get rid of him and he doesn't believe them about his parents, he's like, take your fancy clothes and your black silk underwear and go back to Disneyland. And I swear, he could have just tossed in another faggot right there, and it would have seemed right at home in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the whole thing with the predatory lesbian bodyguard.
Which, okay, I swear, the lady that plays that role, I don't know her name offhand, but she should have played, what's her name? The Vagina Squeeze-A-Lot, the Famke Chance's character from GoldenEye. Like, she could have been that character.
Xenia on the top.
Yes, thank you very much.
And the woman is, I think her name's Corey Evanson. I think she's kind of like a Bobo Cynthia Rothrock type of person.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I got from her. And was it her, or was it the woman that played Danielle that had the introducing credit in the opening credits?
I think it was her. I think she had the introducing Corey Evanson credit.
Okay, awesome, yeah. So yeah, I didn't really look at her IMDb. Did you see if she had done anything after this? Was she more of like a stunt person?
She was on. I can't remember exactly. Hold on. I think she was on some episodes of like Xena. I'm sorry, Xena. But let me see. I have it open. She was in Natural Born Killers. She was in Ballistic. She was on Renegade. Lois and Clark.
Oh, that's all I need. I actually really have a soft spot for Renegade.
Oh, dude, me too. It's amazing.
Man, I've been kind of wanting to rewatch that recently. I haven't really looked and see if it's on Hulu or Netflix or something, but that Lorenzo Lamas, that hairy bastard, I love him.
Lorenzo Lamas and Branscombe Richmond, which is one of my favorite names ever.
Yes.
As what's his name, Bobby Six Killer or something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that, but oh man. And I think I forget the name of it now, but there was I was just at like a thrift store or something recently, and I came across some Lorenzo Lamas like kickboxing fight movie or something like that, and it just had him and just the hairiest of chests on the cover, and I was like, yep, I need that. That's $1. Oh, I will buy that for $1.
And I mean, he's kind of one of those people that came out in the wake of Van Damme, really, right? Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Because he again, I think like he did some of those like kickboxer type movies kind of starting out in like the 80s and stuff like that. And then, and I guess kind of mostly made his mark in TV, but yeah, he seemed to do just as many.
Yeah, he's in a lot of movies. I'm looking at his IMDb page right now.
Oh, he has like over 100 credits. I was going to find the movie that I found recently, but who knows if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Oh, yep, just found it. Final Impact. Came out a year later.
I think... Wait, he was in Grease?
Yes, he was. He was Sandy's jock boyfriend.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize he was that old.
He was baby-faced in that, though, so he was a tiny, tiny person then. He was young.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, the movie I picked up recently on VHS was Final Impact that came out in 1992, which is a kickboxing movie.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course it's a kickboxing movie.
That cover, though, just that mane of chest hair. How could I resist?
I mean, what more could you want? That's all I can say. So,
welcome to the Lorenzo Lamas podcast, where we will go episode by episode through Renegade. I guess this kind of goes to show where the plot goes in this movie that we can so easily get on a Lorenzo Lamas rant.
I mean, there's no plot. They introduce the plot about 2 scenes in, and that's it. There's no developments. There's no twists or turns. It is literally, we have to kill these 2 people.
Well, that's the thing, yeah, and it's just kind of a lot of chase scenes and stuff, but yeah, there's never really any character development, like, no one really learns or grows anything, except at the end, the brothers hug each other because they just killed everybody together. But we have scenes, like, when Alex is going to make a trade to some pirate guys or something for cars for cash, and then the police come, so they have to get away from the police and drop cars in the ocean, which... Okay, I do love that they drop those 2 Mercedes-Benz in the water, and then Jeffrey Lewis just shoots them with a gun, and then they blow up in the water. Which also, Jeffrey Lewis, I didn't realize that he died recently, but he died last year, apparently, so R.I.P.D. But that dude worked. That dude had 222 acting credits on IMDb.
Oh, wow.
Which might be the most I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think that's really the biggest disappointment with this movie, is that there's so many... things they could have done that would have made it more fun or better or more enjoyable. You know, a scene where like Chad shows Alex something he can do and it kind of rubs off on him a little bit, you know? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, because there's not really that at all. Like, there's a scene or two where, like, they give each other a head nod because one of the other one did something okay. Like, that's it. But yeah, they're not, like, sharing skills with each other because that would have been a good scene. Chad doesn't know anything about guns, so Alex has to teach him how to shoot, and they bond over that. Maybe, Alex doesn't know martial arts as well, so maybe Chad gives him a little bit of training when they're on that fucking island for half the movie.
Yeah, there's none of that. Nothing. It's literally just almost 2 hours long, and there's essentially 5 minutes worth of plot. And that's the thing I found the most interesting about this movie, is that there's just nothing.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, and that's why I said the opening and the ending are pretty great, but in the middle, instead of doing something interesting, instead of building on these characters, it is just kind of like, oh, we need to get this person, so we go to this person. Oh, and then the bad guys are after us, so they chase us and we run away. And then we meet back up with these people. Oh, but then the bad guys show up and they try to kidnap this person, and yada yada yada, without ever really knowing anyone's motivation other than the 2 brothers want to kill the people that killed their parents.
Yeah, there are scenes, there is action, but there's no plot or twists or anything. to make it interesting.
Well, I mean, even like the bad guys, like Bolo Young gets the best of it because he's in the movie the most, so you get to see him being the second-hand man to Zhang, kind of the head bad guy.
Yeah.
And then, he beats the shit out of Van Damme a couple of times. They have their final fight scene, and, it's pretty gratifying. But the female bad guy, like, she has a weird rapey scene with the girlfriend, and then at the very end she fights Van Damme for all of 2 minutes before Van Damme stabs her, which is also an oddly sexual scene, because while they're fighting, like, she grabs his dick in the middle of it, and then when he's like about to put a knife into her, she has her ass like grinded into his crotch during that. Like, it's the most sexual thing ever.
Yeah, there are a lot of dick shots in this movie. It's really weird. I wasn't expecting that.
Oh yeah, a lot. From everyone. There's a couple of, like, Jeffrey Lewis dick shots in this movie.
I will say the two things I really thought were cool about this movie during that whole, like, sequence at the end were, I thought the Bolo Young fight was really fun. And I kind of love that he gets kicked in the face 7 times in a row.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing, because I was counting, like, the splits and the spinning heel kicks and stuff like that. And yeah, that's what got the count up to, like, 8, was the fact that there were so many in a row for him. And also, slow motion screaming and fighting is another big trope.
Yeah.
And I think I counted 9 instances, and I'm being pretty conservative with that number. I'm counting entire sequences as 1. My favorite of which, though, is towards the end, when Van Damme is running away after the Bolo Young fight and everything's catching on fire. And so he runs away, jumps in the air, and screams as everything explodes behind him, all in slow motion.
Of course. Amazing. And the one other thing I thought was cool was the little fight scene with the guy who had the spurs on his shoes. How it's
yeah, which that's another character that should have had. He has 2 scenes, like Carmel Cariffa, the mahjong manager. He kicks him and slits his throat open because he has, like, these sharp spurs on his boots. And then there's the shadow fight scene with Van Damme, and that's it.
And they don't even really set any of that up, because when I saw like him, like, slit the guy's throat, I was like, wait, how'd that even happen? Did he kick him? Because, I mean...
I think there's the briefest shots of just, like, you see a spur on his boot, and then that happened.
And, I mean, I've seen so many, like, trash movies that just seeing cutaways to feet, I think, oh, they're just doing coverage or something. So I wasn't even thinking of that when I was watching it. No,
that was apparently a plot point.
That was actually a plot point. I thought they were just trying to cover something up.
No. Well, I mean, maybe. But yeah, it's just such a useless character, because then there's one scene where it's a darkened room and the guy's, like, sneaking around, so he's like a shadow spur kicker. And then all that happens is Van Damme, like, punches a hole in the wall and light comes through and the dude freezes up like, oh no, you can see me! And then immediately goes down.
Yeah, I think they might have designed that for, like, the Super Nintendo game.
But yeah, so again, the best parts of this movie are the beginning and the end. The Bolo Young fight is awesome. Bolo Young in this movie at all is kind of great, because even during their fight, he has a little nod to Bloodsport, because he totally, like, blows snot out of his nose before they start fighting.
Yeah. And the way he does that pose, like, before the fight actually starts, where he just shows off his ridiculous traps. I love it.
God, those muscles are ridiculous. But yeah, that was kind of the only other time we got any kind of, like, shirtless fighting and stuff, because they both lose their tops in that, and then they're all just glistening, muscles bulging, about to fight each other. And again, Bolo Young is just an intimidating villain. Like, he works in this movie, but like I said, once that fight is over, I love the fact that Bolo Young, his character, just gets fucking electrocuted, and that's how he dies.
Yeah, it's not even like an explosive electrocution, though, right? He literally just, like, shakes and falls down.
Then it's boring, because, yeah, you're just chasing down wimpy businessmen, and that goes on for, like, another 15 minutes. So then the British bad guy, Griffith, he goes squish. He gets squished by, like, a big storage container, which I thought was kind of cool. And then the other guy, he gets thrown off of, like, a huge forklift thing. And again, like, it's fine. They're cool deaths, but the whole chase was just fucking boring.
And then there's no real ending. It's just like a freeze frame of Van Damme giving, like, the thumbs up or whatever.
Well, I do love that that's the ending. Like, of course we don't find out what happens with the tunnel, if they get their fortune, like, what happens to them if they stay together or whatever. But yeah, and it's a beautiful ending, because Van Damme winks all the fucking time. I don't even want to try to count those as a trope, because that'll take up half my page. But Van Damme winks at himself, and then the other him winks back at himself, and then gives the OK sign, and it freeze frames and fades out, and then we end on Feel the Impact.
Apparently they're actually like shopping around the sequel right now. They have it written and they're trying to get it made.
Yeah, and maybe with his resurgence that could happen, but I kind of feel like at this point, I mean, maybe Van Damme will just take what he can get, but I feel like he would maybe prefer to do something a little bit different. Maybe instead of Double Impact 2, which isn't really going to play. No one's really going to give a shit about that. Like, just doing more movies like he is now. Like, something like Kickboxer, that kind of works, because that's a big enough movie. But Double Impact 2? No. You can call it Triple Impact, I guess. So, as someone that had not seen too many Van Damme movies, what are kind of your final thoughts on this? We do a final Van Dammage rating, which, of course, highest 1 to 10. 10 would be, like, Bloodsport, and 1 would be, the shittiest of the shit. Derailed is usually the example I give.
I think I'd give it a 4.
A 4? Okay.
A 4. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It was just bland. I think it's worth watching because I think it's a movie that is interesting if you put it into context. And I think there's a lot kind of going on under the surface, even if it wasn't intended to be that way. But I wouldn't say it's a terrible movie. I've seen worse 90s action.
Absolutely.
It's
some by Van Damme himself.
It's perfectly fine. It's
a
movie. That's all I can say, really.
I think I would give it a pretty solid 6. Like maybe a 5.5, but probably like a 6. Like it's probably on par with something like Cyborg, to where it's a decent movie and it's pretty good as a Van Damme movie. But to be honest, I enjoyed Cyborg a lot more. So I'm trying to remember what I gave that. So probably like a 5.5 would be a solid answer for this. But like it's fine. Van Damme gets to do something a little different. But there are just a lot of uncomfortable moments and just kind of shitty things in the movie. And it does drag a lot in the middle. But again, if you don't like this Van Damme Twins movie, you got 2 more to choose from.
Yeah, exactly. And one of them's a sci-fi movie, so...
Which I really actually love Replicant. I can't wait to do this on the podcast.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's actually really... Because it's him and Michael Rooker as well, which is just fucking awesome.
That sounds pretty awesome.
There is a scene of Michael Rooker just treating Van Damme like a dog.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, yeah, so Replicant. soon to come on Jean-Claude Van Damme. So to kind of wrap things up, do you have anything you'd like to plug? I know you said you had a podcast, correct?
Yeah, a friend of mine and I, we have a podcast called Regarding Tampa. It's really more of like a local Tampa sort of thing. It's not really film related or anything like that. We've interviewed some directors on there. Kind
of like local directors and stuff?
Yeah, the last episode we did was actually about a year ago. We haven't done one in a long time. It was an interview with William Graffet. He's like one of the real like godfathers of like Florida exploitation films from the 70s and the 60s. He did Sting of Death, which is a movie about a giant killer jellyfish man in the Everglades. He did Mako, The Jaws of Death, which is like a weird mashup of Jaws and Willard.
That I actually have seen.
He did that. He did Impulse, which is a Bill Shatner vehicle from like right after Star Trek got canceled.
That sounds familiar, but I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, he's done all these crazy movies, and we interviewed him because they were doing a screening of Impulse at the Tampa Theater, which is our local kind of independent theater, and the reason why they're doing the screening was because the movie was shot here in town.
Cool. And where can people find that?
It's just at regardingtampa.com.
Anything else? Any website, Twitter handles, Facebook things? Want to give a shout out to your moms? What's going on?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is at schlockvalue. It's the same thing on Letterboxd too. I post. I don't write a lot, but I try to throw a few things up whenever I log a film.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Evan.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Cool, and we'll see you here next time on Jean-Claude Van Damme.